It's not in the face! Thank you.
Hello and welcome to Hey, Not the Face with your host, John Nash, and your producer, me, Steffi Haynes. And today we have a lot of content. We're going to talk about some lawsuits against Karate Combat. We're going to talk about Conor McGregor's lawsuit. We're going to talk about Johnson versus Zuffa antitrust case. We're going to look at some criticisms that other boxing promoters are lodging against this proposed bill for the amendment of the Ali Act. We're going to look at Josh Barnett's opinion and Derek Brunson's opinion and Dan Hooker's opinion. We even have an update for the Mousasi versus Bellator lawsuit. But if you want access to all of that content, you have to subscribe because about half of it will be behind a paywall. Now, let's get rolling. John, how the heck are you?
Well, fairly good, except the air quality here in the Midwest, Minnesota, is god-awful. Apparently, a jet stream from Canada has come down carrying forest fires, so Canada's having their revenge on us, I guess, for our terrible trade deals with them. So I'm stuck inside. I can't even really go outside. The air quality is so bad.
Wow, you escaped from one bad air quality to end up in what one would think would be just the most pristine air possible, only to find that you're stuck inside with bad air quality. That is insane.
When you phrase it like that, that kind of sucks.
It really does.
Yeah, I'm not enjoying. I mean, in LA too. The thing is, before I came out here, LA was just on a streak of nothing but excellent air quality. We don't, the forest fires usually kick off the grass fires and stuff over the summer. Late summer air quality gets bad around 4th of July. None of those problems this year. It was the air quality was actually good around 4th of July. People finally got tired of letting off on their own firecrackers. And now I come out here and escaping the beautiful air of LA to this hellhole of Minnesota. So enough complaining, because people want that. I could probably, if people want that and request that, I could do a full hour of complaining, but I don't think people want that.
All right, let's go ahead and get down to brass tacks. Top of the question list. Conor McGregor lost his appeal against Nikita Hand today. Any thoughts on the judge's decision?
Well, I mean, McGregor, usually never goes to the judge's decision because he gets finished before then. So this was kind of one of a first for him because, he usually doesn't lose from the judge's decision. And today he lost. He continued his losing streak, even when he got to the decision part. So listen, I don't know. We don't have much to say about this other than Conor McGregor has really fallen in multiple ways. One is, he lost a civil case over rape, which, it's not a criminal case. So, but you can say he lost a civil case. He's a civilly convicted, in a civil case convicted sex offender. So you can no longer hide behind it hasn't been proven in a court of law. That his argument was dropped at the last second, and that's why the judge ruled against him, which is extra bad because it looks like, and this is just my interpretation and picking a gleaming off some of the Irish media, it looks like, at least the way the judge looked at it, is that here you are presenting this as a way to smear her, to kind of like and run a PR campaign. But when it came time to demonstrate the facts in a court of law, you dropped your case. So that's bad. That doesn't look good. So across the board, McGregor has not had a good last few years. His losing streak continues, and this was just another loss. And I'm, it's sad to say, I shouldn't say it's sad, but you don't want to wish ill on people, but I kind of wish ill on him in this case. So I'll go with that. I am not upset about the judge's decision. I'm happy. I'm happy that Nikita Hand gets some more money, and I'm happy to see that he lost in court.
Now, I do have a question for you.
Yes.
He has taken a lot of financial losses over the past couple of years. We discussed a while back how he took somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.3 million American, because they said it was something like 2.1 million euros for his Black Forge Inn. And then he had a couple of years ago, or maybe a year and a half ago, somebody threw a Molotov cocktail through the window of the Black Forge Inn. And then just last week, the Black Forge Inn took significant fire damage, basically almost burned to the ground. We found that his stout, that Black Forge stout, last year took something like 9 million euro loss. This Nikita Hand appeal, had he not appealed, he would have only owed her somewhere in the neighborhood of, I believe it was around 300,000 euro. But now it's 2 million euro that he owes her. So I got to ask you, is he burning through that fortune at an alarming rate?
I wouldn't say he's not an alarming rate. I mean, the amount of money he made, we can estimate he made 27 million US dollars in the Lee case. Based on the evidence I've heard, based on the numbers I've heard thrown around, my estimate for what he made on just his UFC fights since then are probably in the neighborhood of, 80 million, let's say. So 100, at least combine the two, 100 million from his UFC revenue. So that's a large amount of money. Then you throw in the Mayweather fight. Now, huge numbers were thrown around. And again, my understanding is, and this seems very logical, is that the UFC took a big cut of that. Usually when you loan out your fighter, often in the contract or the agreement, the promoter that leases or loans them out gets a percentage of what that fighter is paid. And for the top guys, usually it might be like 20% they might take. My understanding is for McGregor was 40, 50%, maybe even more. So he made, a lot of money, tens of millions, but he did not get the 100 million mark. He's not keeping that for himself. The large portion of that went to the UFC. So you add that up, he has, generational wealth. And then you throw in, of course, the sale of his whiskey, which again has been exaggerated because people look at the final selling price, the final valuation, and then they take his earlier shares and don't realize it's been sold off piece by piece along the way. But even then, he's made tens of millions upon more scores of millions on that. So you add it all together, he should have generational wealth. But I'm not certain, his spending habits are outrageous. I'm not certain who he's investing in. And some of his connections are more than a little sleazy. So you do wonder, I doubt he's poor. I doubt he's spent it all. You would think if he just put it, just in a market fund, right, that he would have just ungodly amount of money that he could live the rest of his life on health, very comfortably. But you do wonder about, how much he really has left and how much his burn rate is. But I doubt he's in the poorhouse. I really doubt that. But I do have suspicions about this. I would like to see how his Forge Inn or whatever, Black Forge Inn, was doing business-wise, because that almost sounds like a Goodfellas style bust out, that fire.
Right? Like an insurance scam. That was my very first thought was, he's been losing money. The first thing is he put it in the middle of a lower middle class neighborhood. Like that, everybody railed against it when it first opened, that nobody could afford it in the neighborhood where he put it. And then it's taking all these losses, and then he's pretty much universally hated over there because of all the things that he's done. And then it's burned down.
Yeah, I mean, we can imagine that someone lit the fuse, that they had a bust out, that Joe Pesci and Ray Liotta showed up one night and strung the kerosene cotton balls through the roof. But there's no evidence, so I'm not going to say that.
Right.
I just think it's amusing. But I don't think he is. People listening in this, I think, he might be blowing through his money rapidly or wasting money and losing money. But I think the amount of money he's made, he should still have generational wealth somewhere. I find it very difficult to believe that he blew through that much money, even as much I'm trying to phrase this in a correct way. I guess I just even as many powdered donuts as he likes to likes to eat.
What about his connections with the mob there? Could there possibly be some squeezed investments out of him into nefarious activity? Because, I mean, one of his sisters is either engaged or possibly married to a very prominent Kinahan henchman. At the wedding, at one of his family's wedding, recently, I mean, it's been within the last 2 months, he was photographed and videoed with a few of the henchmen of that syndicate. So do you think that something there could be squeezing some of that wealth down?
I mean, I have no way of knowing that. I kind of hinted at when I talked about some of the people he hangs out with.
Yeah.
And I think that's possible. I mean, it's possible, but I have no evidence. I have no way of knowing. We do know that, some of the ways Kinahan supposedly laundered money was just by paying boxers and then getting a piece back after the money was paid through the banking system. But I do not know any, business dealings he has with Conor McGregor that group does, but it is an unsavory group. But it is something about the fight business that so many people seem to have relations with organized crime. I mean, the Fertitta's dad is always linked to the mafia. There's a lot of books. Dana White and Lorenzo Fertitta were friends with Wayne Harriman, who's a member of the Buffalo mob. Dana White himself, supposedly his wife, her dad, according to some sources, was a member of the Chicago outfit. So it seems to be, and then of course we got Pride and the whole Pride.
Yeah, the whole Yakuza.
Yeah. So, and European combat sports seems well deep in bed with the Kinahan family and others. So, just more of the same. So it's impossible to say, but it wouldn't shock me just because so many people are involved with organized crime and combat sports.
A couple of weeks ago, we reported on some lawsuits against Karate Combat. And now you have additional news and some updates. What's going on there?
Well, first of all, the lawsuits, if people recall, we talked about there were 3 lawsuits involving Karate Combat. The 3 suits were, I'm trying to remember the names. They were the ITP Productions LLC is the company that does business on behalf of Karate Combat, the productions. They were being sued by the Freeman Company. They owed $222,000. Onset Services, ITP versus ITP Productions, they owed almost $90,000. And then Limitless Light and Sound, who they owed $76,000. So of those 3 suits, I see one of them, according to the cases, has been settled. One had a default judgment against, the judge ruled because they put in no defense, one of the 2 in Texas, against Karate Combat, or basically ITP Productions. And so the judge ruled in favor of the plaintiff. And the other one is asking for a default settlement because they put no defense forward. Now, I had spoken to some people, my understanding, and I don't have evidence of this because I haven't seen it, but my understanding is that Karate Combat maybe went to one of those companies that they had a default verdict against them, and they've come to an agreement of a payment plan. So if that's true, that means 2 of the 3 companies, they might not have been paid off yet, but they have some sort of payment plan to pay them off. And what's interesting about this, and there's other news in the background, and one of them is that the fighters on their most recent show, the 2-night show, is I'd heard that they had signed contracts with the fighters that they do not get paid for up to 30 days, which is kind of alarming to me. But looking into it, I learned that that's actually a common, Karate Combat does that all the time. So should we be concerned that they haven't paid those fighters? Potentially, if they haven't paid these firms. But on top of that, I have spoken to people, and apparently people at Karate Combat, their staff, some of them claim they have not been paid for months. And so that suggests that Karate Combat has some serious financial problems. Now, I asked Karate Combat for comments, and, they gave me some, I spoke to some people there, it's above their pay grade, but I've also talked to some other people. And apparently, now this is where I have to be careful, because I don't want to blast Karate Combat too much because my understanding is they are refinancing the company, that they are, like I said, they are in the process of paying off their staff. That's the last I heard. That's what they said. That's what some people told me they're doing, and that they're paying off these firms. So my hope is, I guess there's two ways to phrase this. One is Karate Combat has serious financial problems right now, right? The other way is perhaps that they've figured out their financial problems and they're settling them either through, new financier or some investor or something else, and that they're going to continue forward with less problems, because they did talk about that they have a reorganization of the company. They're reworking the finances. So I guess it's a long-winded say that we should just be, I guess, aware and just pay attention to Karate Combat going forward, because it would be good to know if they settled up all their debts and they can go forward as a viable company, or if this was evidence that they have, more serious financial problems going forward.
There were some filings in the Johnson versus Zuffa UFC antitrust case. Can you give us an update on what those filings were?
Yes, they are asking for discovery. There's several filings that they've sent out subpoenas to various people that they want for discovery, give testimony, to hand over evidence, things like that. And one, they've asked the court to compel one interesting name. They've sent out a bunch of these requests to managers that represent fighters, including, I'm pretty sure, Jason House and Iridium. And I believe, I cannot remember what other managers for sure were on this batch, but I know he was. And as well as Dominance MMA, who they are asking the court to compel because Dominance is not complying with that request. So that's one name everybody should be aware of. The other thing they're doing is they have requests going to Zuffa, and they have various requests to a long list of people, Zuffa employees. Zuffa sent back that some of them, they do no longer work there, like Joe Silva and Nikisa Badarian, who, if people are on Twitter, they might have seen Rob Macy and others go after Nikisa Badarian to ask him, as he's talking about being pro fighter, why are you not complying with the request for discovery when we are, going on a case to get money for fighters against the UFC? So he's another person that they requested, but there's several at Hunter Campbell, Andrew Schleimer, Ariel Emanuel, Dana White, all of them. And so they have requested them the long list of stuff they want from them for discovery. And they're trying to compel that with the judge. There's some back and forth. And they also have a list of, we do know they have a list of all the items, electronic items they want from each of these people. Like for Dana White, they want his Windows laptop, his iPhone 16 Pro, which is his current model, his prior cell phone. So they have a list of all these items that everybody's using that they want to have access to and want preserved information from sent to them. So Sean Selby, they have an Apple laptop. They have no current cell phone, but they want his prior cell phone. So that's what's going on right now. Is it's a request to get information out of all the UFC, TKO, potentially Endeavor, all the staff, all the people that are there. They're trying to get discovery. What's interesting about this, though, is if you notice if you paid attention to the previous suit, the Lee v. Zuffa, I do not remember them ever filing an order to ask the judge to have anybody to compel, specifically a manager, to compel them to disclose information, to comply to the court's request, to their request for material. That's new. So I found that somewhat interesting. Especially, it's also interesting that the one that they filed it against, at least the only one so far, is Ali Al-Abdelaziz of Dominance MMA. And perhaps that's because he has a history of making comments, supposedly saying stuff behind the scenes, whatever, on behalf that he's backing the UFC, in which case, there might be a trove of information on those text messages, whatever, that might be worthwhile for them to retrieve. So that is what's currently going on in the antitrust lawsuit. So we will see if they can compel people to get them to hand over material, or if they'll ask the court to compel anybody else. But that's where we currently sit.
What happens if they don't comply?
Well, I'd have to ask around and look up specifically, because I am not certain in a case like this what the court can do. What commonly happens. Now, if it's a criminal case, there's contempt, there's things like that can happen. But in a federal civil antitrust case, I'm gonna have to ask. I will get back to people next week about what will happen.
Can you give us thoughts on how this new American Boxing Revival Act may impact the UFC antitrust cases?
Yeah, that's perhaps underreported. And if your fighters are listening, you should probably pay attention to this, because it could potentially have a pretty big impact on the plaintiff's case against the UFC. Now, if you're a fighter and you saw the previous fighters got some money, and people complain it wasn't much, but at the same time, they got $250 million, which is basically about half of what they were paid from 2010 to 2017. So in many ways, we always talk about we want a pension fund in combat sports. That's kind of like a pension fund. 10 years after you're done fighting, you get a lump sum equal to 50% of what you earned during your career during that span. So that's money that a lot of fighters could use. So if you're a member of the Johnson case, you're hoping, I'm sure most fighters, except if your name is Moicano, you're hoping to see the plaintiff successful so that you would get some additional money in the future when you could use it. But this TKO boxing, I should call it the RE Act, this Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act, because of the way it has this UBO, Unified Boxing Organization, this carve out, that could impact the plaintiff's case against the UFC, and I'll explain how. One thing it does, it allows UBOs to have their own titles and rank, right? And because they have their own titles and rank, that means that they have great influence over the fighters. But if the UBO, this is passed and that's made legal, well, if you look at the Phil Davis case, the argument in the Phil Davis case, in fact, much of the argument is based on the fact that they're arguing that the UFC's monopoly power, or they're abusing it as evidence of what has been banned in boxing. And they have the records from the Ali Act, the congressional records, the legislative record from the IBC versus New York case, explaining how, if the promoter controls the titles and rank, they can use that to coerce fighters into taking worse contracts, and they can attain monopoly power over the weight classes, which is a good description of what the UFC does with it. And so the Phil Davis's case, while it's not asking for any money and it's for fighters outside the UFC, it could potentially have a big impact on the UFC case, because imagine if this goes forward, it looks like the judge may make a ruling on it. Well, what they're asking for is that contracts only be 1 year in length. That is kind of the nuclear bomb to the UFC. That is the worst case scenario. They dread a decision like that would limit their contracts to 1 year, would completely change the business model. And if that was to happen, you imagine before it got to that spot, before it got to the part where the judge made a decision, because they wouldn't want it to get that far, if it looked like it was even getting close to heading that place, they would instantly call the other side and say, we want to settle. We want to settle. We'll limit the contracts maybe to 3-4 years, but we don't want a 1 year, and we will settle, and we will not argue that the fighters in the class action that signed arbitration agreements, that they are no longer included. So we will automatically include them, and we will not go forward with the trial. We will settle and pay all the fighters. And so the fighters will win. And so all those fighters that signed arbitration agreements might even end up getting some money without having to fight the arbitration agreements, because right now they are not part of the class action because they all signed class action waivers. So that's the potential outcome. That's the outcome I kind of see potentially happening with the Davis case. But it's harder to argue that if you are arguing, like, look at the example of boxing, and then there's a federal law in boxing says this is 100% legal, that there is nothing wrong with having your own titles and ranks. In which case, it's, again, much more difficult to make the case that Phil Davis's argument makes, is that this is how you monopolize the sport, and here's the evidence we have. And so that would hurt that case, making it much more likely all the other outcomes I just said. So that's one way it could impact it. And then the other thing that has not to do with the antitrust case, but for years, the people that filed this antitrust case, the MMAFA, Rob Macy, and all the fighters, they've been trying to argue that we need the Ali Act extended to cover MMA. Well, if this ever happened, that someone in the future said, you know what, we're going to include MMA under the Ali Act. We're going to cross out boxer and put boxer and fighter, or put fighter, so everybody's covered. Well, if this other bill passed, the Muhammad Ali American Boxing Revival Act passed, then it would make no difference to extend the Ali Act MMA, because that carve out, the part that Macy and them want, is to separate title from promoters so that there's more competition, more leverage for the fighters. That would have an impact because there's a carve out for unified boxing organizations. And so if you covered MMA, suddenly the UFC is like, we follow all the rules of a unified boxing organization. We do not have to follow the Ali Act. And so there would be no purpose to extend it. So that's the thing I think the fighters have to pay attention to, not just boxers where this would impact them, but MMA fighters, because one is, if you had hopes that the Ali Act would someday be extended to MMA fighters, well, this would basically neuter any power the Ali Act would have to MMA fighters. And the other is, if you have hopes that possibly that the Davis case could be used as a cudgel to force the UFC to settle the entire case, including the arbitration agreements, because of the threat of the 1-year contracts, well, this case could also make that less likely. So I would be paying attention to both of those if I'm a fighter, especially a fighter in the UFC right now, who's hoping someday to perhaps get a check in the future on a settlement.
We previously discussed criticism that Bob Arum and Eddie Hearn directed at this new bill. And then today we got an open letter from attorney Pat English and a Clapback Thursday video from Oscar De La Hoya also ripping into it. Are we finally seeing some resistance from the current players, or is this a lot of noise?
Well, I do think we're seeing some resistance. I think they're starting to wake up to the possibility of what's going on. I think it might be too little too late, but I think what woke them up is when they actually saw how the bill was written, and as Luke Thomas calls it, and I think this is great, because I think, I don't know why, recently the word bespoke has become very common. We used it a while ago, but he called it a bespoke bill, designed specifically for the UFC, and bespoke is, like handcrafted individual items that clothes mostly, that like a tailor makes specifically for one individual. So this is a bill that was tailored specifically for TKO, for their boxing organization in the future. I think when they saw this, that's when the realization is, this is serious. This is a serious attempt to take over boxing, because they have a bill that's been designed specifically for them that's very hard for any other promotion to follow. And so you see these comments. Now, I'm not sure how, again, too little too late. I'm not certain what their next step is going to be, but you do detect, at least amongst the promoters, some resistance now. Now, amongst the fighters, the boxers, I've seen very few comments. And amongst the media, it's a mixed bag. You have your Jake Donovans. You have I'm sure the Boxing Brunch. I'm sure they have. I would put in this, but I've been so busy with my mom, I haven't listened to them lately. So I apologize, guys. I usually listen to them every weekend. But all those guys, I'm sure, understand what the bill does. And I'm sure I've seen glimpses that they a bad left hook as well, I'd put in that category. That they understand the bill, they understand they're properly arguing, making the case what it's going to do. Adam Abramowitz is another guy I would put in that category. All of them, I think, get what this bill is, what it actually is. But then you have the more, I would say, more mainstream boxing writers. I would put Chris Mannix in that category. Coppinger, it seems absolutely clueless about this subject. And there's not much pushback from them. There's not much, their discussion about it. I was very disappointed in Mannix's show because it didn't seem like he fully understood, or he wasn't aware of the impact of the Ali Act on some of the things it did. As we had Kurt Emhoff on here, I think did a very good job of laying out specific things it's done. and how it works. I think they miss that. So the boxing media space, I'm not detecting a lot of pushback yet. And part of it is that there's, again, the certain people I've named, I'm sure they've done a good job, or I'm sure they did if I could pay attention to them because I wasn't taking care of my mom. But for the larger, the ones, the bigger voices, it seems like either they're not aware, or because boxing hasn't had the problems at the UFC, that you don't have the obvious example of what the UFC's done. I wonder if a lot of them just can't imagine that happening in boxing. So it's nice to see the promoters waking up. Again, is it too little too late? But the rest of boxing, I think, is still kind of, large portions of them are asleep at the wheel on this.
What do you want to see from boxing in response to the bill?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, one is I would like to see them clean up boxing. I mean, boxing, the thing is, you can't say boxing's perfect, and you can't say it doesn't need to be fixed. I think we talked about before that the boxing and UFC are both the flip sides of the same coin. They have the same problem, which is the title.
To access the bonus content of this episode, you must be a paid subscriber. To do that, go to heynottheface.substack.com and subscribe today.
Ow! Ow! Not the face! Ooh! Okay, the face!